The truth of masks. I want to start thinking about the clothed body, the ritual body, and I'm going to share an image of um, the following. So, this is Lady Gaga, and she was getting dressed for an event, I think it was 2018, in which she was talking at some kind of event of women in Hollywood, and she is used to wearing an evening dress, and like that's typically what people do, women do at these events. And she tried on different suits and dresses, and they didn't feel right. And then she found this suit, which is a Marc Jacobs really oversized suit, as you can see. And she gave her speech in this suit. And I'm talking about consumer ritual and how, like, the consumer goods like clothing and fashion that we do, as well as the performance that we put on. And she was giving a speech, she was performing on a stage in front of a live audience, but also um, a, a video audience, thousands of people, and talking. In this case, she was talking about herself as a woman artist, and she gave some personal stories too, even about sexual assault, and she was thinking, for me to give this talk, I don't know exactly what she was thinking, but here's something of what she said. She said, "This was an oversized men's suit made for a woman, not a gown. And then I began to cry. In this suit, I felt like me today." So she was, for me to give this speech, this felt like me. So, like, her identity, her authentic self, she has to express that through her clothing. So we need clothing to even just be myself, for her to be herself. "I felt the truth of who I am well up in my gut, and then wondering what I wanted to say tonight became very clear to me." And she started talking about the current state of red carpet dressing and how it's good and beautiful in many ways, but maybe not always respectful of the body as it should be or it could be. And she thought that for me to respect my body and other people's bodies, that this oversized suit was appropriate. And and there's a kind of a modesty in it, not showing the contours of her body. And she's talking about, she had been talking about sexual assault, and like maybe an over sexualized suit might be too weird in that context. And also, it's a gendered thing. She's kind of wearing a man's suit, a power suit, in that context as well. So the ritualized body, the truth of masks, is what we're talking about. And consumer ritual, ancient versus modern. And if in ancient times, rituals were like this, like you have the Greek festival, the Dionysia festival, and it's several days, and the people gather and they kill animals and slaughter them and offer them on altars to the gods, Dionysius, Athena, and they have music and choruses, and they have dance, and they have a big Greek tragedy. In fact, they have three of them, and the people to get together and they watch these tragedies, and they're crying together, and they're shaping their identities. And there's funny plays like a satyr play, or there's the Jews. We talked about the ancient Jews and the Seder meal and the order of the cups and the arranged plate and the unleavened bread, because we're in a hurry, because we're getting ready to be saved by God from our slavery. in a family setting. This is gaining our identity, and and that's ritual. And then you come to today in the 21st century. And what do we have? I mean, some people have still some of these rituals. But even if you do, you don't have it as for the whole society. We have a multicultural society with multicultural societies. And so what do? You have the Jew living next to the Christian, living next to the agnostic, and yet we're trying to build identities. And so there's two things I would say that, let's say me, a modern Jew or a modern agnostic, is doing. And one is that I'm in a parallel polis, a polis like a city, a group, a tribe. And so I'm in my parallel polis. I'm like in my Jewish tribe next to the Christian tribe, next to the agnostic tribe. But I have a tribe, and I go to that synagogue, and I go to that group, and I have my group activities. That's the parallel polis. And yet there's also this partial common ground. So like that all of us, the Christian, the Jew, and the agnostic, are sharing, whether, I mean, it can be just simple things like watching the World Cup, and we're all Americans, and we're all having that same identity, or Man U fans. One time I was watching a Champions League final, and I think it was Barcelona versus Arsenal, and Thierry Henry was there. I remember, the French player. But I was watching it with a person from Spain and a person from China, and here was me from the United States, and we were all together, and we were all kind of fans. And we, even across the world, we have these partial common grounds, shared common culture, and a ritual space of even wearing the right fashions and behaving the right way. And so that's one simple way that there's this partial common ground in addition to the parallel polises. Or there's even kind of more unusual ones. Well, there's Comic-Cons where people literally get dressed up, and then they identify with each other like, hey, we're wearing the same Jedi uniforms or whatever. And some people actually make their religion the Jedi. That's like actually one of the more common or the growing religions in the United States, are people who claim Jedi as their religion. Or there's conspiritualities, like there's conspiracy and spirituality kind of merged, whether it's the QAnon, and you have the QAnon shaman who's got the, anyway, face painted and everything. And yeah, so these are, there's different types of modern rituals. And there's consumer ritual, which is involved in all of these things in terms of fashions and styles of speaking and styles of behaving and gathering at events and ritualized, clothed, embodied behaviors. So this is what we're talking about. And there's a story element here. There's a mythos, there's a story, a narrative. What is the story element? Well, in any given consumer ritual, there's valuing a great achievement in art or song or athleticism, watching Barcelona and Arsenal. Or there's pleasure in beauty, of performance, of music or of athletic performance. There's losing yourself in communal experience. There's an ecstasy where you let go and you shout, and it's Dionysian and it's cathartic, and it's you are uniting with others. You are in a communal communion, touching for a moment what I'm going to call the transcendent. And the transcendent means that which is beyond the material world. And so there's this immaterial aspect of reality that we touch when we're ecstatic. And where time kind of pauses and we touch, we're not no longer in sort of watch time, but we're sort of in eternal time. We're sort of touching eternity. And this happens in my clothed, ritualized body. And I think about the philosophical movement of phenomenology. and which began with Edmund Husserl, and you had Martin Heidegger, and the one in particular I want to focus on is Merleau-Ponty, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, French phenomenologist, and he wrote about the phenomenology of perception and how I perceive, and I talk all about like relevance, realization, and all these things, gestalts, and Merleau-Ponty has, I'm using a lot of his thought as I'm doing this, and he talks about fashion and clothing, and think about high heel shoes for a second. I know this is really kind of strange. I want to talk about this in terms of mythopoeia and story, but the click of the heels of a high heel shoes on the hard ground and the experience of that, the phenomenological experience of that, like it kind of jolts your attention and expectation, and that person's communicating to you partly just from wearing those shoes, and you can even think about like how high those heels are. Like that's also communicating specifically. Like stiletto heels are different than like smaller heels, or like no heels, like these kind of common, what are they called? Anyway, just heelless shoes. Like all those things communicate a lot actually about what's going on in that experience of that person, and so something even kind of like sexual about the high heeled shoes and the click, and it's communicating to some extent my emotions, and it's bonding me with others. And what I want to do as we're talking about Merleau-Ponty and the experience of fashion, the phenomenology of fashion, the phenomenology of consuming goods, of consumer culture, is to explode the idea of the inner versus the outer. The inner is my true, genuine self, and the outer is this mask, this fashion, this fake. And I want to assert with Oscar Wilde that there's the truth of masks. And Wilde, in his very inimitable manner of talking, famously said, "Man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask and he will tell you the truth." And obviously there's a kind of a spectrum of performance between the inner and the outer, and there's and the genuine and the fake, or the sometimes we're faking it till we make it, and so let's go to the shared screen for a second here and think about this on paper a little, in which you have, let's say, a spectrum of performance where on one extent, like let's call it the more performative side, you have a spy, someone who's literally lying about who they are and pretending to be something else, and going into this country and pretending to be a scientist, but they're really like stealing all these state secrets and so forth. And like Lee Harvey Oswald, he goes to the book depository in Dallas to get a job, but really he's there to kill somebody, to assassinate JFK. And let's say in the middle you might have like an adolescent, really any of us, but anyway, let's stick with an adolescent, someone who's 15 years old, who is he or she? Well, they try, and they end up, and I'm not criticizing adolescents here, but they can tend to be a slave of fashion. Like they have to wear Abercrombie and Fitch or whatever it is, and they need it in order to join their tribe, to break from their parents, and they're trying out this role, they're trying out this script, or maybe they might even like go military and like start wearing military fatigues, as I did when I was in high school, And I tried that out for a little while, but it didn't stick. I'm not a military guy. And then let's take someone who's pretty genuine. And I'm just not, I'm not, again, I'm not trying to say anything negative, but let's take a Down's person, a Down syndrome person, who is pretty much giving you what you see is what you get. They say what they think. They don't really lie too much because they don't really know how to. And they're like the sort of the most genuine of these people. And so, yeah, so where am I on this spectrum at any given moment? And most of us are in the middle. I mean, very few of us are really saying what we think and expressing it very quickly. Very few of us are spies. But yeah, so this means to wear the mask is to be yourself, as Wilde was saying. And there's a certain self-creation going on here. In a weak sense, obviously no one creates themselves. You were born and you were born into a specific belief system and even a language. You can't even think without that language, so you are thrown into that situation. The thrownness that Martin Heidegger talks about, but in a weaker sense, that you're self-creating. This is kind of Nietzsche, and I think, this is a legitimate aspect of Nietzsche's thought, in a weak sense. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to go too far with this. And whether that's Lady Gaga too, and she's trying to find out who am I, and she tries out this dress, but no, this is not me. She tries out, and then she finally finds this suit. This is me. This allows me to be me. And so we're in this self-creative situation, kind of at all times, really. And that doesn't mean I don't have a real self. Of course, I do, and you do, which perdures your whole life. But there is this aspect which is kind of self-creative and so forth. And we are in this multiculture, pluralism that's different from the ancient or medieval worlds of almost all the cultures. Were kind of one main culture with its set rituals and its set roles, and there was this really strong common ground with very little wiggle room. And there was, some multicultural societies, something like ancient Rome, because it was this huge empire, or the Greek Empire, or different empires, Chinese Empire. But there was one official viewpoint. And now we don't have that. The common ground is very partial, but it's there. And it's there in patriotism. And people experience patriotism and express patriotism differently in terms of even like what you wear. Some people will wear a flag or a soccer jersey for the nation. I remember, going to watch the World Cup at some bar, and people wearing the Mexico jersey, and then they see each other, hey, and then they become buddies all automatically, and they're like cheering each other and drinking together and so forth. As I grab another little drink here. And so there's patriotism. And then there's other real ones like Martin Luther King Jr. Day or Holocaust Remembrance Day. Are those religious events? No, they're not, but they're quasi-religious. They're more than just secular. And they touch at a deeper part of the self than a soccer game or a football game. And they touch shared values. And I was at the Holocaust Museum. I'm in Houston, Texas. I was at the Holocaust Museum here, and it's a ritual, and there's a quietness, and there's a respect because it's almost like going to a funeral because so many people died and you're remembering the death of these people. And you're seeing even like pieces of clothing or things that they had, these people, and you feel pain and sorrow for the loss. And you're uniting with others in this kind of ritualized moment, and you're hearing sounds and you're seeing images. And some of it's beautiful, and some of it's actually extremely ugly, but that's like part of the effect that you need to get the full knowledge of what happened in the Holocaust. And so let me go back to the drawing board and think about a different spectrum where we have, in a certain sense, a neutral vision where you're not promoting any specific religion or viewpoint or vision of a fulfilled life, to a very specific religion, let's say Judaism, and where that's the official religion and everyone promotes those ideas alone and they don't express other ideas, and not, at least not in public. You got to do them in private. And so where are we today? And I'm saying again, we're somewhere in the middle. I'm not sure. Let's. I think I'm not sure where. Let's put it straight in the middle, where there's some shared values, and there's some totally non-shared values. But thinking about even just remembering the Holocaust, for example, there's a pretty significant set of shared values there. So actually, I'm going to kind of pull us over here. This is like me today in my multicultural society of the United States. That there's still a significant set of shared values that links me to the others. And I go to the 9/11 Memorial in New York, and I honor those heroes, those firemen and women. And there's a kind of big set of values of heroism, of self-sacrifice, of America, of all those things going into that. And so this is not just gaining information, this is gaining formation. I'm being formed. It's going deeper than just simple information. It shapes desires, it shapes what I love, it shapes who I am, it shapes my identity. Those strong rituals, when we talked about the rituals of the Jews and the Seder meal and the Passover, the Pasch, which tells the Jewish person who they are. This is, you are a son and daughter of God who saves you. And this is your people. And you need to be united to this people and do these rituals every year to keep yourself connected. And I would argue that we need these. We need these, let's call them what? The partial common ground rituals. I know it's a long word, but there's a partial common ground, and it has its rituals. The Holocaust, the 9/11, the death of some great people, commemorating them, or important people, George Floyd, that other person killed by police in a criminal murder. These events shape me and you and the culture for the country and really for the world, because these things many times reach out to the world. And these things do what? They counter nihilism, because nihilism or nihilism is this tendency that is happening in a multicultural world, and Nietzsche, the death of God, he kind of sees this happening in the Europe of his time, and that there's this vacuum and this unloosening of the self, and you're just kind of drifting dangerously, like who knows where you can crash land. And so how do you anchor that? How do you give it some moorings? And so this is, I think this is what we have. We have this, what do I call it? Partial common ground, and the partial common ground rituals. It's not the debunking, it's the rebunking. So like there's a tendency to debunk the old myths, and whether that's sometimes literally debunking them and saying, okay, there's no Zeus, and I'm sorry, there's no Hera out there that it's worth, you know, killing animals on in a sacrifice to. But then there's also debunking like the myths of like the American dream, or of the virtue of heroism or the virtue of courage. Like, well, no, we can't debunk all those things. We need those things. We need those mythoi. We need some of these stories just to live. And so this gets to these partial common ground rituals. These partial common ground rituals are embedded in consumer culture. This is about consumer rituals as an important, hugely important part of who we are today. And we need to philosophize about these things. We can't just set it aside as the academy has tended to do, and then we don't have any real thought about this and any critical reflection on it. And we need to fight against nihilism. And so we're rebunking. And I'm not proposing a Bible or a Quran or anything like that, but we have these other values, more general, more generic, but deep, identity-forming values. And this gets us to Oscar Wilde again. And Oscar Wilde presents the consumer rituals, presents the priests and priestesses of consumer rituals, who are the men and women of fashion, at least often, and the first well-dressed philosopher in the history of thought in that play, An Ideal Husband, and that is Lord Goring, who is what? He's got several qualities that allow him to be that first well-dressed philosopher in the history of thought. Let's get a new page here. And what are these things? So this is about being the well-dressed philosopher. This is like a new type of philosopher and thinker and creator of culture and creator of myth. And can I call him a commodity artist? Someone who makes art within the commodity culture, within the consumer culture? Well, here are some of the qualities of this commodity artist. They have skill in consumer culture. They can work those roles, those scripts. The Manchester United, the U2 fan, even politics, the Democratic National Committee, the Republican National Committee, like they're working within those scripts and roles and fashions. Also, they have charisma. They help give other people an identity, and whether that's like Nietzsche's Übermensch, this overman or Superman, who's kind of creating a new culture, sometimes creating a new religion or a new belief system. They're standing in symbolic relation to the culture. they've hit the zeitgeist. They're like, well, to take Hegel's example, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, in Napoleon's time was Napoleon. Napoleon was the zeitgeist riding on a horse. I mean, he was the right person at the right time, and he took it and he ran with it, and he conquered much of the world. And people loved him or hated him. And they're performing their identity. They're partially in a fluid identity and partially a set identity. So they're partially fluid and partially set. And I guess doesn't this correspond to some extent to the fact that they're in a multicultural situation. And so they're partially in a polis in their whatever their religion or their belief identity is, but they're also moving and changing scripts and changing clothing, and like Lady Gaga, changing her fashions for particular events and expressing herself in that event using pre-scripts. Like the suit has a kind of a script behind it, and she's using that to her advantage, and she's twisting it and manipulating it to make the story that she wants to make. And that's this skilled commodity artist that we're talking about. And whether that's Lord Goring or it's Oscar Wilde himself, to some extent I would say it's J.R.R. Tolkien himself, who's working the same things. And so, yeah, so I guess let me put some of these people down here for a second. Lord Goring, from An Ideal Husband, the character, who is kind of the hero of the play, and yet he's also this very superficial, fashion-conscious guy, changing his clothes 4 times a day in order to like set the occasion, going out to the opera every other night, that kind of thing. He's performing. He's a performance artist. Or the female counterpart, who actually becomes his engaged fiance, is Mabel Chiltern, where she's also kind of dressing the part and performing the part and playing with scripts of the woman of fashion. As I take another swig here, and I got a little bit of a cough. Let me see if I have a cough drop. Let me just get this going here for a second. Excuse me. And so she's a sex symbol. She's an archetype. She's setting the stage for many other women to imitate her. She's a woman of fashion. And so that's it. And so they're combining all these things, the skill, the charisma, the being in relation to their age, their partly fluid, partly set identity. Goring has this core character, his strength of character, which allows him to act heroically and save his friend and save his friend's wife at key moments, even though no one expected of him. And so he has what we might call just a kind of traditional virtues of friendship and loyalty. And so these are the aspects of the well-dressed philosopher in the modern multicultural age. And so I'm going to keep working these ideas, defending or expressing consumer ritual, commodity artist, art within the commercial industries. This is against a kind of Marxist reading or even a kind of certain types of Christian readings of modern consumer culture, which sees them as false consciousness or fetishism or exploitation, purely exploitative. There is obviously some exploitation in any culture, including consumer culture, but there's tons of artistic ability, artistic possibility within consumer culture. And that's what I want to keep talking and writing about.